My neighbor poisoned my rescue cat because he cried too much, so I made sure she'll never own a pet again. I rescued Oliver from a kill shelter 3 months before Dorothy moved next door. He was traumatized, cried at night sometimes, but was getting better. First week, Dorothy knocked to complain. I explained Oliver was a rescue with anxiety, showed her everything: pheromone diffusers, anxiety medication, special beds. She said animals that broken should be put down, like his life meant nothing. Daily complaints, banging walls when Oliver cried, notes under my door, telling neighbors I was torturing a sick cat. I offered to pay for white noise machines, soundproofing, moving Oliver's space away from her wall. She refused everything. Said the only solution was getting rid of that damaged thing. Building management inspected, said Oliver was fine. The vet wrote a letter explaining his treatment. Management told Dorothy pets were allowed. That made her angrier. She started leaving euthanasia articles under my door, describing how peaceful it is when animals are put to sleep. Then Oliver got sick. Throwing up, stopped eating, lethargic, pale gums. The vet found antifreeze in his system. Someone had poisoned him. Oliver was indoor only. The only way was if someone put it in his food. I remembered Dorothy had been friendlier that week, apologized, offered homemade cookies, asked about Oliver's special diet food. Treatment cost $4,000. Oliver barely survived, needed fluids for weeks, lost so much weight you could see every bone. When Oliver came home, Dorothy acted concerned. When I said he'd been poisoned, she said maybe it was a sign his suffering should end. Maybe someone was trying to help him find peace. That's when I knew. I installed cameras, changed locks, watched her constantly. 2 weeks later, caught her on camera. She'd gotten into my apartment while I was at work. Footage showed her going straight to Oliver's bowl with a small bottle, poured something in his wet food, stirred, left. Police collected the bowl. Tests confirmed antifreeze. Dorothy was arrested that evening, told cops she was helping. Oliver was suffering and I was too selfish to see it. She was doing the humane thing. During investigation, something emerged. Dorothy had lived in 3 different apartments in 5 years. Every building had pets mysteriously dying. Cats, dogs, rabbits. Always pets that made noise. Always poisoning. Detective found her search history. How much antifreeze kills cats? Making poison taste good to animals? How long antifreeze takes to kill pets? She'd been doing this for years. Then they discovered Dorothy worked at an animal daycare. Access to dozens of pets daily. 3 dogs had died mysteriously in the past year. All difficult dogs with behavioral issues. Deaths attributed to unknown illnesses. The daycare fired her immediately. At trial, 11 pet owners testified about their animals dying painfully from suspected poisoning in Dorothy's buildings. Dorothy convicted. 18 months prison, 5 years probation. Lifetime ban on owning, caring for, or working with animals. Can't pet sit. Can't volunteer at shelters. Can't work at pet stores. Can't even feed birds in parks. The daycare is suing for reputation damages. 3 families suing for emotional distress. Evicted. Lost everything. When out on bail, she tried adopting a cat. I'd already contacted every shelter in a 100-mile radius with her information. She's blacklisted everywhere. Oliver's thriving now. Barely cries. Gained weight. Plays constantly. Dorothy's in prison learning that poisoning pets is destroying families. She thought Oliver's life didn't matter because he was damaged. Now she's irreparably damaged. Banned from the one thing she obsessed over controlling: animals. But yesterday my phone rang. The prosecutor. Dorothy made bail on appeal. What? How? Her lawyer found a technicality. The search of her apartment might have violated protocol. My blood went cold. She's out? As of this morning. She's required to stay away from you and Oliver, but what? She's filed a civil suit against you for defamation, emotional distress, and lost wages. She poisoned my cat. Her lawyer's arguing the conviction might be overturned, that you orchestrated everything. Dorothy's claiming you poisoned Oliver yourself to frame her. That's insane. There's more. She subpoenaed your vet records, your work schedule, your bank statements, looking for anything to suggest you needed money or attention. The video shows her. Her lawyer says it could be anyone. The quality's grainy, and Dorothy has an identical twin sister. What? Diana. Estranged for years, but Dorothy's claiming Diana had access to her apartment, that Diana might have done it to frame her. My hands shook. Where's Dorothy now? We don't know. She didn't report to her probation officer this morning. I looked at Oliver, peacefully sleeping in his bed. I have to go. If you see her? I hung up. Because I was looking at my apartment door. It was open. Just slightly. I always triple-checked the lock. Oliver's food bowl was full. Fresh food I hadn't put there. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. A photo. The photo showed Oliver in his bed. The angle wrong. taken from inside my apartment just minutes ago. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I grabbed Oliver from his bed and stuffed him into his carrier. He yowled, but I couldn't stop to comfort him. I ran to my car, fumbling with my keys, nearly dropping them twice. Once inside, I locked all the doors and started driving. My phone was already dialing 911. The operator answered, and I tried to explain, but my words came out jumbled. Dorothy broke in. She was in my apartment. She took a photo. The operator kept asking questions I couldn't focus on. I just kept driving toward the police station, running 2 red lights because I couldn't stop. Couldn't risk being caught at an intersection where Dorothy might find me. The police station parking lot felt like the only safe place left in the world. I carried Oliver's carrier inside, still on the phone with the operator who was telling me officers would meet me there. The lobby was bright and cold. A detective I recognized from Dorothy's arrest came through a side door. He saw my face and immediately started moving faster. I showed him the photo on my phone. He looked at it, then at me, then back at the photo. He grabbed a radio from his belt and started talking fast, codes I didn't understand. But I heard Dorothy's name and my address. Within seconds, other officers were moving, some heading out the door, others gathering around computers. The detective led me to a small room with a table and chairs. He brought water I couldn't drink. Oliver was making small distress sounds in his carrier. I opened it and pulled him out, holding him against my chest. His heart was racing as fast as mine. The detective sat across from me and asked me to tell him everything from the beginning. I explained about the prosecutor's call, about Dorothy being out on bail, about coming home to find my door open and the fresh food in Oliver's bowl. He wrote everything down. His radio kept crackling with updates. Officers were at my apartment now, searching it, looking for signs of forced entry. The detective asked if I'd touched anything, and I said no, just grabbed Oliver and ran. He nodded and said that was good, that was smart. More officers arrived, and the detective stepped out to talk to them. I sat there holding Oliver, watching through the small window in the door as people moved back and forth in the hallway. Time felt strange, like it was moving too fast and too slow at the same time. 30 minutes later, the detective came back with news. They found how Dorothy got in. I'd left a window cracked in my bedroom for air circulation. It was a small window, but Dorothy was thin. She'd forced it open wider, climbed through, left the food as bait, taken the photo, and left through the front door. That's why it was open when I got home. She wanted me to know she'd been there. The detective said they found partial prints on the window frame and they were processing them now. But Dorothy was gone. No sign of where she went. No car registered to her name. No credit card activity. She'd planned this carefully. The detective's face was serious when he told me Dorothy had violated her bail conditions. There was already a warrant out for her arrest. Every officer in the city had her photo and description. But first they had to find her. He suggested I stay somewhere else until they located Dorothy. He assigned an officer to patrol my building but said it wasn't safe for me to go back there yet. I asked where I was supposed to go, and he mentioned hotels, friends, family. I didn't have family nearby, and I couldn't put friends in danger. So a hotel it was. The detective helped me look up pet-friendly places on my phone. I found one across town and called to make sure they had availability. They did. I paid for a week up front over the phone, watching my bank account drop to almost nothing. The detective walked me out to my car and watched as I drove away. Oliver had finally calmed down in his carrier. I kept checking my mirrors the whole drive, terrified I'd see Dorothy following me. The hotel was generic and anonymous. I checked in using cash for the deposit, gave them a fake name even though they needed my real ID. The room was on the 3rd floor. I carried Oliver and our emergency bag inside and locked every lock on the door. I pushed a chair against it too. The room had one window facing the parking lot. I closed the curtains. My phone rang and it was the prosecutor. He started apologizing before I could say anything. He was sorry about the technicality, sorry Dorothy got out, sorry this was happening. He promised they were doing everything to find her. Police were checking her known associates, her parents' house, anywhere she might hide. I asked how long this would take and he couldn't give me an answer. Just that they were trying. I hung up and sat on the bed. Oliver climbed out of his carrier and started exploring the room cautiously. I watched him sniff the corners and the furniture, trying to make sense of this new place. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. Around midnight my phone buzzed with a message from the unknown number. I almost didn't look. When I did, my stomach dropped. It was a photo of the hotel exterior, the building lit up against the dark sky. Below it was a message. Nice try. She'd followed me. Or she'd found me somehow. She knew where I was. I grabbed Oliver and ran to the bathroom, the only room without windows. I called the detective and he answered on the second ring. I sent him the photo and the message. He told me to stay where I was, that he was sending officers to the hotel right now. He stayed on the phone with me until I heard the knock on my door and the voice identifying themselves as police. 2 officers came in and checked the room and the hallway. They found nothing. The detective arrived 20 minutes later with a laptop. He traced the phone number while I sat on the bed holding Oliver. The number was a burner phone, impossible to track to a specific person. But the metadata from the photo showed it was taken less than 10 minutes before Dorothy sent it. She'd been here, right outside, watching. The detective's expression was grim. He said Dorothy had clearly been planning this since before her release. She'd bought the burner phone, stocked up on supplies, watched my movements. She was organized and motivated. That made her more dangerous. He suggested I move to a different hotel, but I didn't see the point. If Dorothy could find me here, she could find me anywhere. The next morning, the prosecutor called again. He was filing emergency motions to revoke Dorothy's bail entirely. He'd present the break-in, the photos, the threats as evidence that Dorothy was a clear danger to me and Oliver. The judge scheduled a hearing for 3 days away. 3 days felt like forever when someone was hunting me. The prosecutor tried to reassure me that police were actively searching for Dorothy. They had officers watching her parents' house, her old workplace, her previous apartments. But so far, nothing. Dorothy had vanished. I asked what happened if they didn't find her before the hearing, and the prosecutor said the warrant would stay active. She'd be arrested the moment anyone spotted her. That wasn't as comforting as he seemed to think it was. That afternoon, I was watching the news in the hotel room when Dorothy's lawyer appeared on screen. He was doing an interview with a local reporter, standing outside the courthouse. He claimed his client was the real victim of a vindictive neighbor. He talked about Diana, the identical twin sister, and said her existence created reasonable doubt about who really poisoned Oliver. He said the twin could have committed all the crimes and framed Dorothy. The reporter asked where Dorothy was now, and the lawyer said he didn't know, that she had every right to protect herself from harassment. I threw the remote at the TV. Oliver jumped at the noise. The lawyer was making Dorothy sound innocent, making me sound crazy. People watching would believe him. They'd think I was the problem. I called a security company the detective had recommended. They could install cameras at the hotel room door and window. The installer arrived that evening with equipment. He set up a camera pointed at the door and another at the window. Both fed to an app on my phone. I could watch the feeds in real time and get alerts if there was any movement. The detective called while the installer was working and said the department would pay me back for the security equipment. It was part of the active threat situation. I thanked him, but I wasn't sure reimbursement mattered when I might not live long enough to use the money. That thought came out of nowhere and scared me. I pushed it away and focused on watching the installer finish his work. When he left, I locked the door behind him and checked both camera feeds. They were working. I could see the empty hallway and the parking lot below. For now, I was alone. But I knew Dorothy was out there somewhere, watching, waiting, planning her next move. 2 days dragged by with no trace of Dorothy anywhere. The police checked every location they could think of but came up empty. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing with new photos from that unknown number. First, it was the hotel lobby shot from across the street through the front windows. Then a picture of the parking lot taken from somewhere up high, maybe a neighboring building. My car was circled in red marker. The third photo showed the veterinary clinic where Oliver gets his checkups. Dorothy had been there too, standing right outside the entrance with other pet owners walking past her. She was everywhere I went or might go, showing me she could reach me whenever she wanted. The detective said they were trying to trace the phone sending the messages, but Dorothy was using some kind of app that bounced the signal around, made it impossible to pin down her actual location. He suggested I stop going to my regular places for a while, change my routine completely. But that felt like letting Dorothy control my whole life. The prosecutor called on the third day with better news. He'd gotten a judge to approve subpoenas for Diana's phone records and travel history. If they could prove Diana wasn't anywhere near the city during the poisonings, then Dorothy's whole defense would collapse. Diana apparently cooperated right away when the prosecutor's office contacted her. She seemed disgusted that Dorothy was trying to frame her for attempted murder. Diana sent over years of phone records, credit card statements, work schedules, everything the prosecutor needed. She'd been living in another state the entire time Dorothy lived in my building, had a full-time job there with attendance records proving she showed up to work during every single incident. The prosecutor said Diana was being incredibly helpful. She wanted Dorothy held accountable and was angry about being dragged into this mess. The bail hearing happened 4 days after Dorothy broke into my hotel room. I sat in the courthouse waiting room with Oliver and his carrier, both of us nervous. The detective stayed with me the whole time. He said Dorothy still hadn't been found, so the hearing would happen without her there. That seemed wrong somehow. How could they revoke someone's bail when that person wasn't even present to defend themselves? But the detective explained it happened all the time with fugitives. The judge could make decisions based on the evidence even if Dorothy refused to show up. When they called my case, I walked into the courtroom with the detective. The prosecutor was already there organizing his files. Dorothy's lawyer sat alone at his table looking frustrated. Then the back doors opened and a woman walked in who looked exactly like Dorothy. Same height, same build, same facial features. For a second, my heart stopped because I thought Dorothy had actually shown up. But then I realized this had to be Diana. She wore professional clothes and carried herself differently than Dorothy. More confident somehow. Less tense. The judge asked Diana to approach, and she did. Under oath, she testified that she hadn't seen or spoken to Dorothy in 8 years. They'd had a falling out over family issues and cut contact completely. Diana provided documentation showing she lived 2 states away during all the poisoning incidents. She had work records, apartment leases, utility bills, everything proving she was nowhere near my building when Oliver got poisoned. She said she was horrified when Dorothy's lawyer tried to blame her for these crimes. The physical resemblance between them was shocking to see in person. They really were identical. But Diana's cooperation felt genuine. She answered every question thoroughly and seemed truly disgusted by what Dorothy had done. When Diana finished testifying, she looked at me and said she was sorry for what I'd been through, that her sister was sick and needed serious help. The judge listened to all the evidence, then made his ruling. Dorothy's bail was revoked immediately. He issued a warrant with increased charges, including stalking, violating protective orders, harassment, and failure to appear. The judge said Dorothy was clearly a danger to me and Oliver, that she'd used her freedom to terrorize us instead of following the court's conditions. He set a new trial date for 2 months away and said Dorothy would remain in custody once arrested. No more bail, no more chances. The prosecutor thanked the judge and promised they'd find Dorothy soon. But as we left the courthouse, my phone buzzed again. Another photo. This one showed the courthouse steps from across the street, taken just minutes ago while we were inside. Dorothy was still out there watching, still sending her messages. The warrant didn't matter if they couldn't catch her. I couldn't keep living like this, jumping at every sound, checking my phone constantly for new threats. Oliver was getting stressed too. He barely ate and cried more at night. We needed better protection than just hotel cameras and police patrols. That evening, I searched online for private security consultants who dealt with stalking cases. Found a woman named Salma Agarwal, who had great reviews and experience with situations like mine. Her rates were expensive, but I didn't care anymore. I called her office and explained everything. She agreed to meet me the next morning at the hotel. Salma showed up exactly on time, carrying a laptop and some kind of scanning device. She was probably in her 40s with short dark hair and sharp eyes that seemed to notice everything. First thing she did was check my hotel room for any surveillance equipment Dorothy might have planted. She found nothing but said that didn't mean much. Then she asked about my daily routine, where I went, who I talked to, what patterns I followed. As I answered her questions, she typed notes on her laptop. When I finished, she looked up and said my safety plan had serious problems. I was too predictable. Used the same hotel, same parking spot, same routes to and from places. Dorothy could track my movements easily because I wasn't being careful enough. Salma said stalkers were predators who studied their targets. I needed to think like someone hunting me and eliminate every pattern Dorothy could exploit. The plan Salma laid out was intense. We'd move to a completely different hotel across town that night. Not tell anyone where we were going. She'd set up a security protocol with varied routes every time I left the building. Different times for check-ins. Code words I'd use when contacting people so they'd know it was really me and not Dorothy pretending. Salma would monitor my phone and email for any suspicious activity. She'd also coordinate with the detective to make sure police knew our new location, but kept it confidential. The whole thing felt overwhelming, but also validating. Salma treated Dorothy like a serious predator instead of just some angry neighbor. She understood the danger was real. We moved that night. Salma drove us to the new hotel in her car instead of mine in case Dorothy was tracking my vehicle somehow. The new place was smaller and cheaper, but Salma said that was better. Less obvious. Fewer people around to notice us. She helped me set up the room with motion sensors and cameras. Showed me how to check for anyone following when I went outside. Gave me a panic button that would alert her and the police if I pressed it. By the time she left around midnight, I felt safer than I had in days. Oliver seemed calmer too. Maybe he could sense I wasn't as scared anymore. The next morning, the detective called with new information. They'd been digging into Dorothy's finances and found something disturbing. 2 weeks before the bail hearing, Dorothy had withdrawn $15,000 in cash from her savings account. All at once. The detective said that proved Dorothy had been planning to run for a while. She'd probably known about the legal technicality her lawyer found and prepared for it. The money meant she could hide for weeks or months without needing to use credit cards or leave an electronic trail. She'd been setting this up since her original conviction. Maybe even before that. Dorothy had played everyone. Made them think she'd follow the court's rules while secretly preparing to disappear. That afternoon, the prosecutor called with unexpected news. Dorothy's parents had contacted his office wanting to help find their daughter. They were horrified by how far things had escalated. The stalking, the break-in, the threats. They'd tried talking to Dorothy after she made bail, but she refused to listen. Now they wanted to cooperate with police. They told the prosecutor about a cabin they owned 2 hours north of the city. A family property Dorothy knew about and had access to. The parents thought she might be hiding there. Police organized a raid for that evening. The detective said he'd call me as soon as they knew anything. I waited in the hotel room watching the news on my phone. Around 8 that night, the detective finally called. Police had raided the cabin an hour ago. Dorothy wasn't there, but they found evidence she'd been staying there recently. The detective said it was disturbing stuff. Photos of me and Oliver covering one wall. Some taken through my apartment window before Dorothy was arrested. Others more recent showing me at the hotel, at stores, walking Oliver to my car. Dorothy had been stalking me for months, documenting my life. They also found maps of my neighborhood with routes marked, notes about my schedule, supplies for long-term surveillance like binoculars and a telephoto camera lens. Dorothy had turned that cabin into a command center for hunting me. But she'd cleared out before police arrived. Probably had some way of knowing they were coming. The prosecutor filed additional charges the next day. Multiple counts of stalking, harassment, violating court orders. Each new charge added years to Dorothy's potential sentence if they ever caught her. The detective said every police officer in the region had Dorothy's photo now. They were checking bus stations, train stations, rental car companies, looking for any sign of where she'd gone. But so far, nothing. Dorothy had vanished completely. And my phone kept buzzing with new photos. The coffee shop I'd stopped at that morning, the grocery store parking lot, the park where I'd taken Oliver for some air. Dorothy was still out there, still watching, still showing me she could get close whenever she wanted. The cabin raid hadn't stopped her at all. The next morning, Salma showed up at the hotel with her laptop and a serious look on her face. She opened a tab showing my social media profiles. Photos from the past few months were pulled up on the screen. Coffee shop check-ins, tagged photos at the grocery store, location markers at the park where I walked Oliver. Salma pointed at the timestamps. Dorothy had liked several posts, commented on a few, left reactions that seemed innocent at the time but now looked different. Every single interaction gave Dorothy information about where I went and when. Salma pulled up more evidence. A photo I'd posted of Oliver 3 weeks ago had metadata showing the exact coordinates of my apartment. A friend had tagged me at a restaurant last month. Dorothy had screenshot the post according to police records from her phone. She'd been building a map of my entire life through social media. We spent 2 hours scrubbing everything, deleting accounts, removing tags, contacting friends to take down photos that included me. Salma made me change all my passwords and set up 2-factor authentication on everything. She explained Dorothy had probably been tracking me this way for months, maybe even before her arrest. Every post was another piece of data, another way to predict where I'd be and when. By noon, my entire online presence was gone. No social media accounts, no public profiles, no digital footprint Dorothy could follow. It felt strange being completely offline but also safer. Like cutting a rope Dorothy had been using to pull herself closer. A week passed in the new hotel. Different room, different part of town. No more photos from unknown numbers. But Oliver started getting worse. He wouldn't eat his food, left it sitting in the bowl for hours. At night, he cried the way he used to when I first rescued him. Long, sad sounds that broke my heart. During the day, he hid under the bed or in the closet. Wouldn't come out even when I called him. His fur looked dull. His eyes seemed empty. I took him to the vet the next morning. The vet checked him over thoroughly, ran blood tests, examined his mouth and stomach. Everything came back normal physically. The vet sat down and explained what was happening. Oliver was picking up on my fear. Animals can sense stress in their owners. The constant moving, the disrupted routine, my own terror about Dorothy hunting us. All of it was affecting Oliver just as much as it affected me. The vet said Oliver's anxiety had returned because his environment felt unstable again. He needed routine and calm, but I couldn't provide that while we were hiding. The vet adjusted Oliver's medication and gave me tips for helping him feel secure. Stick to the same feeding times. Play with him even when I felt scared. Create small routines we could maintain no matter where we stayed. But the vet was clear. Oliver wouldn't truly recover until I could give him a stable home again. Until Dorothy was caught and the threat was over. I started seeing a therapist 2 days later. Salma had recommended someone who specialized in stalking victims. The therapist's office was in a quiet building across town. I brought Oliver with me because I couldn't leave him alone anymore. The first session was hard, talking about everything that had happened, how scared I felt constantly, how I jumped at every sound, how I couldn't sleep because I kept imagining Dorothy breaking in. The therapist listened carefully. Then she said something that stuck with me. Dorothy's power came from fear, not from actually being everywhere at once. She was one person. She couldn't be in multiple places. The photos and threats were designed to make me feel like she was omnipresent, like she could reach me anywhere. But that wasn't reality. It was psychological warfare. The therapist taught me strategies for managing the fear. Grounding exercises when I felt panic rising. Ways to challenge the thoughts that told me Dorothy was always watching. Reminders that police were actively searching for her. That I had Salma helping protect me. That I wasn't as vulnerable as Dorothy wanted me to believe. The therapist also explained something important. By letting fear control my life, I was giving Dorothy exactly what she wanted. She was already in prison in a way, hiding and running, but I was imprisoning myself too by living in constant terror. Learning to function despite the fear was how I'd take back control. 3 days later, the detective called with news. Dorothy had used her credit card at a gas station 40 miles north of the city. The transaction had triggered an alert in the police system. Officers responded within 8 minutes. Patrol cars rushed to the location. But when they arrived, Dorothy was already gone. The gas station clerk remembered her, said she'd paid for gas and bought snacks, acted completely normal, didn't seem rushed or nervous. The detective said it was a test. Dorothy was checking whether police were monitoring her cards. Now she knew they were, which meant she probably wouldn't use them again. The detective reviewed security footage from the gas station. Dorothy had arrived in an old sedan with mud covering the license plates. She'd paid cash for most items but used the card for just one small purchase, deliberately triggering the alert to see the response time. The footage showed her watching the parking lot carefully before leaving. She'd timed how long it took for police to arrive. Now she had that information. The detective said Dorothy was smart and calculating. She wasn't running scared. She was planning, testing the systems in place to catch her, learning how to stay ahead of law enforcement. It made everything feel more dangerous. Dorothy wasn't desperate. She was strategic. That evening, Selma came to the hotel with an idea. We could set a trap using controlled information, plant something false that Dorothy might see and act on. Selma explained how it would work. We'd use a friend's social media account to post something that suggested where I'd be at a specific time. Make it look natural. Like my friend was casually mentioning plans. Dorothy was probably monitoring my friend's accounts now that mine were deleted. If she saw the post, she might show up. And if she showed up, police would be waiting. The detective approved the plan. Said undercover officers could position themselves at whatever location we chose. They'd be ready to arrest Dorothy the moment she appeared. Selma picked a coffee shop downtown. Public place with good sight lines. Easy for police to cover without being obvious. We worked out the details carefully. My friend would post about meeting me there for lunch at noon on Thursday. Would tag the location. Make it seem real and casual. Selma stressed that I wouldn't actually be there. It was too dangerous. But Dorothy didn't need to know that. We just needed her to take the bait. The detective assigned 6 undercover officers to the operation. They'd arrive early, position themselves as customers, watch for Dorothy. The moment she showed up, they'd move in. Salma made me promise to stay at the hotel during the whole thing, to keep Oliver safe and wait for the call saying Dorothy had been caught. I agreed but felt weird about it, using myself as bait even when I wouldn't be there. Thursday morning arrived and my friend posted the message right on schedule. Said she was excited to finally catch up over coffee. Tagged the coffee shop location. Made it sound completely natural. I sat in the hotel room watching the clock. Salma was at the coffee shop coordinating with police. She'd set up her own surveillance to monitor the operation. The detective had given her permission to observe as long as she stayed out of the way. 11:30 came and went. Then 11:45. I held Oliver and waited. My phone felt heavy in my hand. At 11:52, Salma texted. "She's here." My heart jumped. 2 minutes later, another text. "Officers moving in." Then silence. 5 minutes of nothing. Finally, my phone rang. The detective. Dorothy had been arrested without incident. She'd shown up carrying a camera with a telephoto lens, had been photographing the coffee shop entrance from across the street, waiting for me to arrive. Officers had approached from multiple directions. She'd tried to run, but they'd blocked her path. Now she was in custody. Actually in custody this time, until Dorothy was caught and the threat was over. I started seeing a therapist 2 days later. Salma had recommended someone who specialized in stalking victims. The therapist's office was in a quiet building across town. I brought Oliver with me because I couldn't leave him alone anymore. The first session was hard, talking about everything that had happened, how scared I felt constantly, how I jumped at every sound, how I couldn't sleep because I kept imagining Dorothy breaking in. The therapist listened carefully. Then she said something that stuck with me. Dorothy's power came from fear, not from actually being everywhere at once. She was one person. She couldn't be in multiple places. The photos and threats were designed to make me feel like she was omnipresent, like she could reach me anywhere. But that wasn't reality. It was psychological warfare. The therapist taught me strategies for managing the fear. Grounding exercises when I felt panic rising. Ways to challenge the thoughts that told me Dorothy was always watching. Reminders that police were actively searching for her. That I had Salma helping protect me. That I wasn't as vulnerable as Dorothy wanted me to believe. The therapist also explained something important. By letting fear control my life, I was giving Dorothy exactly what she wanted. She was already in prison in a way, hiding and running, but I was imprisoning myself too by living in constant terror. Learning to function despite the fear was how I'd take back control. 3 days later, the detective called with news. Dorothy had used her credit card at a gas station 40 miles north of the city. The transaction had triggered an alert in the police system. Officers responded within 8 minutes. Patrol cars rushed to the location. But when they arrived, Dorothy was already gone. The gas station clerk remembered her. Said she'd paid for gas and bought snacks. Acted completely normal. Didn't seem rushed or nervous. The detective said it was a test. Dorothy was checking whether police were monitoring her cards. Now she knew they were, which meant she probably wouldn't use them again. The detective reviewed security footage from the gas station. Dorothy had arrived in an old sedan with mud covering the license plates. She'd paid cash for most items but used the card for just one small purchase, deliberately triggering the alert to see the response time. The footage showed her watching the parking lot carefully before leaving. She'd timed how long it took for police to arrive. Now she had that information. The detective said Dorothy was smart and calculating. She wasn't running scared. She was planning, testing the systems in place to catch her, learning how to stay ahead of law enforcement. It made everything feel more dangerous. Dorothy wasn't desperate. She was strategic. That evening, Selma came to the hotel with an idea. We could set a trap using controlled information, plant something false that Dorothy might see and act on. Selma explained how it would work. We'd use a friend's social media account to post something that suggested where I'd be at a specific time. Make it look natural. Like my friend was casually mentioning plans. Dorothy was probably monitoring my friend's accounts now that mine were deleted. If she saw the post, she might show up. And if she showed up, police would be waiting. The detective approved the plan. Said undercover officers could position themselves at whatever location we chose. They'd be ready to arrest Dorothy the moment she appeared. Selma picked a coffee shop downtown. Public place with good sight lines. Easy for police to cover without being obvious. We worked out the details carefully. My friend would post about meeting me there for lunch at noon on Thursday. Would tag the location. Make it seem real and casual. Selma stressed that I wouldn't actually be there. It was too dangerous. But Dorothy didn't need to know that. We just needed her to take the bait. The detective assigned 6 undercover officers to the operation. They'd arrive early, position themselves as customers, watch for Dorothy. The moment she showed up, they'd move in. Selma made me promise to stay at the hotel during the whole thing, to keep Oliver safe and wait for the call saying Dorothy had been caught. I agreed but felt weird about it, using myself as bait even when I wouldn't be there. Thursday morning arrived and my friend posted the message right on schedule. Said she was excited to finally catch up over coffee. Tagged the coffee shop location. Made it sound completely natural. I sat in the hotel room watching the clock. Selma was at the coffee shop coordinating with police. She'd set up her own surveillance to monitor the operation. The detective had given her permission to observe as long as she stayed out of the way. 11:30 came and went. Then 11:45. I held Oliver and waited. My phone felt heavy in my hand. At 11:52, Selma texted. "She's here." My heart jumped. 2 minutes later, another text. "Officers moving in." Then silence. 5 minutes of nothing. Finally, my phone rang. The detective. Dorothy had been arrested without incident. She'd shown up carrying a camera with a telephoto lens, had been photographing the coffee shop entrance from across the street, waiting for me to arrive. Officers had approached from multiple directions. She'd tried to run, but they'd blocked her path. Now she was in custody. Actually in custody this time. The detective said Dorothy had a backpack full of surveillance equipment, more cameras, binoculars, a notebook with my daily routine written out in detail, maps of places I frequented. She'd been planning to follow me from the coffee shop, to find out where I was staying. The arrest had stopped her before she could do any of that. I felt something release in my chest, relief so strong it made me dizzy. Oliver meowed and I realized I was holding him too tight. At the police station, Dorothy refused to talk initially, sat in the interrogation room with her arms crossed, wouldn't answer questions, wouldn't explain why she'd shown up at the coffee shop. The detective let her sit in silence for an hour. Then he brought in all the evidence. The photos from her backpack, the notebook with my schedule, the camera with images of the hotel exterior. He laid it all out on the table in front of her, showed her the timestamps, the metadata, the proof that she'd been stalking me for weeks. Dorothy stared at everything for a long time. Then she started talking, said she was just trying to prove the original charges were wrong, that she'd been framed. She needed evidence to show the court, needed to demonstrate that I was lying about everything. The detective asked why she'd been photographing my hotel, why she had maps of my neighborhood, why her notebook contained details about when I left and returned each day. Dorothy claimed it was all research, said she was gathering proof of my deception. The detective pointed out that nothing in her evidence suggested I'd done anything wrong, that all her surveillance showed was a person trying to live their life while hiding from someone who'd poisoned their cat. Dorothy got angry then, said Oliver was suffering and I was too selfish to see it, that she'd been trying to help. The same justification as before, the same twisted logic that had gotten her convicted in the first place. Everything she said just made it worse, contradicted her claims of innocence. The detective recorded all of it. The next morning, the prosecutor filed new charges. Multiple counts of stalking, harassment, violating protective orders, violating bail conditions. Each charge carried serious prison time. Dorothy's lawyer tried to negotiate another plea deal, wanted to argue that Dorothy had mental health issues that explained her behavior, that she needed treatment, not punishment. But the prosecutor refused, said Dorothy had already been given chances, had already been convicted once. This wasn't about mental health anymore. It was about a pattern of escalating dangerous behavior. The prosecutor showed the lawyer all the evidence, the surveillance photos, the notebook, the testimony from the coffee shop arrest. There was no technicality to exploit this time, no way to argue the evidence was obtained improperly. Everything was clean and documented. The lawyer tried arguing that Dorothy hadn't actually hurt anyone this time, that taking photos wasn't the same as poisoning. The prosecutor pointed out that stalking was a crime in itself, that Dorothy's behavior showed clear intent to harm, that she'd been hunting someone who'd already been victimized by her once. The lawyer eventually stopped trying to negotiate, said he'd present the best defense he could at trial, but his tone suggested he knew it was hopeless. 2 days later, Dorothy appeared before a judge for a bail hearing. The prosecutor argued strongly against any bail, presented evidence of Dorothy's flight risk, her failure to report to probation, her continued stalking despite court orders, the pattern of escalating behavior, the clear danger she posed to me and Oliver. Dorothy's lawyer tried to argue she deserved another chance, that she'd made mistakes but wasn't violent. The judge cut him off, read through the evidence herself. Looked at the photos Dorothy had taken, the notebook with my schedule, the maps and surveillance equipment. Then the judge made her ruling. No bail. Dorothy would be held in custody pending trial on all charges combined. The original poisoning conviction plus all the new stalking charges. The judge cited clear and present danger. Pattern of behavior showing no remorse or behavior change. Significant flight risk given her previous disappearance. Dorothy tried to argue. Said she had rights. That she wasn't dangerous. The judge told her she'd had her chance. That she'd violated every condition of her release. That she'd proven herself to be exactly as dangerous as the prosecution claimed. Dorothy was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. This time there would be no technicality. No bail. No freedom to keep hunting me. The detective helped me arrange moving back to my apartment the following week, but not before major security upgrades. Salma coordinated everything. New locks on all doors and windows. Deadbolts that couldn't be picked. Security cameras covering every entrance. Motion sensors in each room. An alarm system connected directly to police dispatch. The windows got reinforced with security film. Made them harder to break. The door got a steel reinforcement plate. Made it nearly impossible to kick in. Salma walked me through the whole apartment, pointing out weak spots. We fixed each one. Added extra lighting outside. Trimmed bushes near windows so no one could hide. Set up a safe room in the bedroom with a reinforced door and separate phone line. Salma created a safety plan for if Dorothy ever got out again. Emergency contacts programmed into my phone. Escape routes mapped out. A bag packed with essentials kept by the door. Instructions for what to do if I saw Dorothy anywhere near the building. The detective said these precautions were probably excessive. Dorothy would be in prison for years. But Salma insisted. Said planning for the worst meant I could relax knowing I was prepared. By the time everything was installed, the apartment felt like a fortress. Oliver explored cautiously at first, then seemed to recognize home. He settled into his old spots, started eating normally again. The crying stopped. Within days, he was playing again, acting like the cat he'd been before everything happened. Watching him recover made all the fear and hiding feel worth it. Over the next few weeks, Oliver started acting more like himself again. He stopped hiding under the bed every time he heard a noise. The crying at night became less and less until it finally stopped. I took him back to the vet for a checkup, and she smiled when she examined him. His weight was good. His energy was back. She adjusted his anxiety medication to a lower dose since he was doing so much better. She told me the most important thing now was keeping his routine exactly the same every single day. Same feeding times, same play times, same bedtime. Cats feel safe when they know what to expect. Any changes could bring back the anxiety. I wrote down a schedule and stuck to it perfectly. Oliver seemed to understand that life was stable now. He started greeting me at the door again when I came home from work. He played with his toys instead of just staring at them. He even started purring when I petted him, something he hadn't done since before the poisoning. The prosecutor called me 3 weeks after Dorothy's arrest. The trial date was finally set. 2 months away. I felt my stomach drop when he told me how long I'd have to wait. 2 months of knowing she was sitting in jail thinking about me. 2 months of wondering what she might do when she eventually got out. But then he explained why they were waiting. They were combining everything into one big trial. The original poisoning charges, the stalking charges, the breaking and entering, the probation violations, everything. He said this was actually good news. It meant Dorothy would face the maximum possible sentence. No chance of getting separate trials where she might get lighter sentences. No chance of serving time at the same time for different crimes. Every single thing she did would count. The judge would see the full pattern of her behavior. How she'd been doing this for years. How she'd never stopped even after being caught. How dangerous she really was. The prosecutor sounded confident. He said with all the evidence they had, Dorothy wouldn't be threatening me or anyone else's pets for a very long time. A letter arrived in my mailbox the next week. I almost threw it away thinking it was junk mail. But then I saw the return address and my hands started shaking. Dorothy's parents. I stood in the hallway for a full minute before I could make myself open it. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten. They apologized over and over for what their daughter had done. They said they'd known Dorothy had problems, but never imagined she was capable of hurting animals. They'd paid for her therapy when she was younger after she got in trouble for being cruel to a neighbor's dog. They thought she'd gotten better. They were horrified to learn she'd been poisoning pets for years. They wanted to help make things right. They offered to pay for all my security expenses. The cameras, the new locks, the alarm system, everything. They also offered to cover all of Oliver's veterinary bills going forward, any medication he needed, any checkups or treatments. They included a check for $5,000 as a starting payment. They said to contact them directly if I needed more. Their phone number and email were at the bottom of the letter. I read it 3 times trying to figure out if this was some kind of trick. But it seemed genuine. They sounded like parents who were ashamed and trying to do something good. I called them that evening. Dorothy's mother answered and started crying the moment I said my name. She apologized again. She said they'd failed as parents somehow. I told them I appreciated the help and yes, I would accept their offer. The money would make a huge difference. I'd been struggling to pay for everything while also covering Oliver's medical bills. 2 days later, I got a call from the courthouse. The civil lawsuit Dorothy had filed against me was dismissed. The judge had reviewed it and called it frivolous and vindictive. He said it was clearly just an attempt to harass me further. Dorothy's lawyer had withdrawn from her case entirely. The clerk told me he'd filed papers saying he could no longer represent Dorothy in good faith after learning about the stalking charges. He apparently had standards about who he'd defend. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. One less thing to worry about. One less way Dorothy could hurt me. The prosecutor said this was common when defendants kept breaking the law while out on bail. Their lawyers abandoned them because they made themselves impossible to defend. Dorothy had done this to herself by refusing to follow the court's orders. My phone rang a few days later from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. A woman's voice asked if this was me. I said yes. She said her name was Diana, Dorothy's twin sister. I felt my whole body tense up. This was the person Dorothy's lawyer had tried to blame for everything. Diana must have heard my silence because she started talking quickly. She said she wanted to apologize for being dragged into this mess. She hadn't seen or spoken to Dorothy in 8 years. They'd had a falling out after Diana caught Dorothy hurting her cat. Diana had cut off all contact after that. She was horrified when Dorothy's lawyer contacted her trying to use her as an alibi. She'd already given the police her phone records and travel history proving she was nowhere near my apartment building during any of the incidents. She wanted me to know she was on my side. She offered to testify at the trial about Dorothy's history. She said Dorothy had always been cruel to animals, even when they were kids. She'd killed Diana's hamster when they were 12. She'd poisoned a neighbor's dog when they were teenagers. Their parents had covered it up and paid people off. Diana had tried to get Dorothy help, but their parents refused to admit how serious the problem was. Now Diana wanted to make sure Dorothy faced real consequences. She said she'd tell the court everything. I thanked her and gave her information to the prosecutor. Having Dorothy's own sister testify against her would be powerful evidence. I started volunteering at the animal shelter the following week, the same shelter where I'd found Oliver 3 years ago. I told them my story, and they immediately said they'd love to have my help. They put me in the section with cats who had behavioral issues or trauma. Cats that other people passed over because they were too difficult. I spent hours sitting with them, talking softly, letting them come to me when they were ready. Some of them reminded me so much of Oliver when I first brought him home. Scared, defensive, not trusting anyone. I helped other people who came in looking to adopt. I explained that traumatized animals just needed patience and understanding, that they could heal if given the chance. Several people adopted cats they'd initially walked past after I told them about Oliver's recovery. Working with these animals helped me process everything that had happened. It felt good to turn something terrible into something positive. To help other pets who'd been through bad situations find good homes. The prosecutor's office kept me updated every few weeks. They'd had Dorothy evaluated by psychiatrists to make sure she was mentally fit to stand trial. She was. But the doctors diagnosed her with something called obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. It wasn't the same as regular OCD. It was about needing perfect control over everything. The psychiatrist said Dorothy couldn't handle anything that disrupted her sense of order. Noisy animals represented chaos she couldn't control, so she eliminated them. The doctor said she was fully aware her actions were wrong. She just believed her need for control was more important than the lives of animals. The prosecutor said this diagnosis actually helped the case. It proved Dorothy knew what she was doing was illegal, but did it anyway. It showed a pattern of calculated behavior, not mental illness that prevented understanding right from wrong. 2 weeks before the trial was supposed to start, the prosecutor called with unexpected news. Dorothy's new public defender wanted to negotiate a plea deal. Dorothy would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a specific sentence recommendation. The prosecutor wanted to know my opinion before he responded. He explained that a plea deal would guarantee Dorothy went to prison without the risk of a trial. Trials were unpredictable. Juries sometimes made strange decisions. A plea deal would mean certainty. But it also meant Dorothy would probably get a shorter sentence than if she was convicted at trial. He gave me time to think about it. I spent 2 days weighing the options. The idea of sitting through a trial and having to testify sounded awful. Having to see Dorothy again. Having her lawyer question me. But I also wanted her to get the maximum punishment possible. Finally, I called the prosecutor back and asked what kind of sentence they were offering. He said 8 years minimum with mandatory mental health treatment. Dorothy would have to complete therapy programs in prison. She'd be on a registry after release. She'd never be allowed to work with animals again. I thought about it for another hour. Then I said yes. 8 years was a long time. It guaranteed Dorothy would be locked up and getting help. A trial might result in more time, but it also might not. This was certain. The plea hearing happened the next week. I sat in the courtroom watching Dorothy stand before the judge in her orange jumpsuit. Her hands were cuffed in front of her. She looked smaller somehow. Less threatening than she'd seemed when she was stalking me. The judge asked if she understood she was giving up her right to a trial. Dorothy said yes. The judge asked if anyone had forced or threatened her into this plea. Dorothy said no. Then the judge had Dorothy read a statement. Dorothy's voice was flat as she spoke. She said she'd been trying to help suffering animals, that she believed putting them down was more humane than letting them live with behavioral problems. But she admitted her methods were wrong. She admitted poisoning was illegal. She said she understood now that she'd caused harm to the animals and their owners. The judge listened to the whole statement without expression. Then she accepted the plea and moved to sentencing. She sentenced Dorothy to 10 years in prison, 2 more years than the plea deal recommended. The judge said the pattern of behavior was too serious to show leniency. Dorothy would serve a minimum of 8 years before being eligible for parole. She'd have to complete all mental health programs. She'd be on lifetime probation after release. She'd never be allowed to own, work with, or care for animals in any capacity. The judge added lifetime restraining orders and mandatory mental health treatment. Dorothy couldn't own pets or work with animals ever again. She'd be monitored for the rest of her life after release. The courtroom felt quieter after that, like everyone was finally breathing normally. The prosecutor organized victim impact panels over the next few months. Other pet owners who'd dealt with similar situations showed up to listen. I shared my story with them, explained what happened with Oliver, how I caught Dorothy on camera. Several people came up afterward and thanked me. They said speaking up and reporting Dorothy initially made them feel less alone. One woman told me her rabbit died mysteriously in Dorothy's building years ago. She'd always suspected but never had proof. Oliver changed completely over the following months. He gained back all the weight he'd lost, played with his toys constantly, barely cried anymore. Even tolerated meeting new people when they came to the apartment. The vet said he was thriving during our checkup. I wrote an article for a pet advocacy website about recognizing signs of animal abuse by neighbors. Explained the importance of reporting suspicious behavior. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people shared similar experiences in the comments. Stories about pets dying mysteriously. Neighbors who seemed too interested in their animals. People who wished they'd reported things sooner. Dorothy's parents reached out to me directly. They established a fund to help victims of pet poisoning cover veterinary expenses, donated $50,000 initially, and committed to ongoing fundraising. They were trying to make amends for their daughter's actions. I appreciated it even though nothing could undo what happened. 6 months after Dorothy's sentencing, I went back to the kill shelter. Found a second rescue cat who needed a home. Her name was Luna. She was smaller than Oliver, gray with white paws. Oliver sniffed her cautiously at first, but they became friends within days. Having another pet felt like reclaiming the joy Dorothy tried to destroy. The apartment building implemented new security policies because of what happened. Pet protection protocols, better camera systems. Management credited me with helping make the building safer for all pet owners. They even added my suggestions about monitoring suspicious behavior toward animals. I got invited to speak at a local veterinary conference about recognizing and reporting animal cruelty. Standing in front of hundreds of professionals sharing my story felt powerful. Not traumatic like I expected. The vets asked good questions, wanted to know what signs to watch for, how to support pet owners dealing with similar situations. A year after everything started, Oliver and Luna were curled up together on the couch while I worked from home. The apartment felt safe again, full of life and happiness instead of fear. Oliver purred constantly now. Luna played with everything she could find. I got a message one afternoon from someone I didn't know. Another pet owner in Dorothy's previous building. They thanked me for getting justice for their dog who died mysteriously 3 years ago. Said they'd always wondered what really happened. Knowing my actions helped others find closure made everything worth it. Life's really good now. Oliver's healthy. Luna's settled in perfectly. The apartment feels like home again instead of a crime scene. Dorothy's locked up where she belongs. The other pet owners finally have answers. Sometimes I think about how different things could have been if I hadn't installed those cameras. If I hadn't caught her on video. But I did. And now pets are safer because of it.